And yes, folks, here we are. It is the spoiler room once again. Happy Father's Day. And let me tell you, we've got a month of Fodder's Day for you. Not just one Canon Fodder special, not just two Canon Fodder specials, but three Canon Fodder specials. Two of them you voted for, and the third one I was just like, what the hell? Might as well round out the month that way. Yes, we are kicking off Don't Fuck with Chuck month, and we are looking at Missing in Action #1 from 1984. Yes, the Canon Group film. And with me is my co-host and friend, Mr. Ian Simmons, has ventured into the spoiler room once again to talk the first of this trilogy of films. Hello, Ian. How are you today?
I'm doing great. I was tempted to just give the Chuck Norris stare as my response, but that's it.
Not many people can do the Chuck Norris stare, though. You do kind of got the beard going on.
I like to think that the beard and my kind of unkempt hair, I don't have quite the flow, the waviness that he had in this movie. But it's my tribute to Chuck.
He had the waviness. You got to get the kind of the chops though too. The little more fur here for him, for that look. So,
and all over his body, he had like crazy manicured hair. It was like looking at Robin Williams, but if he wasn't, all curled out and dead. But yeah, it was like he takes his shirt off. I think it was the Honest Trailers guys were talking about the Justice League Snyder Cut, how the male characters were allergic to shirts because they kept taking them off. Chuck Norris gets all kinds of top naked in this movie, and I was like, bring it on. He is a gorgeous looking man.
He was 44 when he was doing this. I mean, he's only a year younger than me, and I'm like, holy crap. I'm like, damn.
I'm hopeful because I turned 44. Oh my God, in just a couple of months. So there's still hope.
There you go. You could look like Chuck. Yeah. Nope. Nope. That ain't gonna happen. That dad body is just gonna fight that every minute of the day. I know my dad body will anyway. It's like, nope. Yeah, right. You're gonna look like Chuck Norris. Sure. No, you're already past 44, so that train has left the station. Why bother? No,
that's the spirit.
I'm past the deadline of 44, so there you go. But yes, we have an older Chuck Norris in a Canon Group film, one of many from Norris. I apologize, folks. I meant to read more from the Canon Group Film Guide, Volume 1, 80 to 84, which if you haven't picked it up yet, you should, because it's an awesome guide. I didn't get a chance to read a lot of it, but I did read some of it, and it's very interesting, this movie and the history of Chuck Norris and Canon films. But before we dive into some of that, Ian, if you could please give us the wonderful synopsis of this English Patient equivalent called Missing in Action. Okay, maybe not English Patient. Just the action scenes.
I'm just going to come back next week, I think, for part 2, because my brain just got scrambled when you... Wow.
No, folks, this is not like English Patient, but please.
Well, now I'm just imagining Ralph Fiennes in the Chuck Norris role.
he does not look like Chuck Norris.
No, but just imagine him like saying, Tuck, if I'm not back in 14 hours, get out of here. Just go. Get the hell out, Tuck.
I don't know if you could sell the American propaganda with a guy with a very thick British accent. But...
What do you mean American propaganda, Mark? Alrighty. Missing in Action. Chuck Norris plays a Vietnam vet named Jim Braddock. Is it Jim? Yeah, Jim Braddock, yeah. I think. Who, he's having horrible nightmares. It's very much like the opening of Aliens. He just got back from a really traumatic experience. He keeps being pestered by the government to kind of like help out and go back to where it all began. And he finally relents because he's having visions of people that were left behind because he was captured and tortured in Vietnam. And we find out that he escaped. but he knows there's other people there. The Vietnamese government is denying that there are any soldiers who are missing in action, anybody they have captive. This is only 9 years after the war ended, when this movie came out, which is something I'm sure we'll get into, because it's pretty remarkable that they would make a movie like this so with the war still fresh in people's minds. But he goes back to Vietnam on a sort of a diplomatic mission and uses that as cover to discover the location of one of these camps where they're holding, former captured soldiers. And he rents a gunboat and gets Emmett Walsh to help him out as his crazy sidekick to go in with some machine guns blazing and rescue some people and leave with one of the, I kept thinking about the end of the original Iron Man, where Tony Stark is giving a press conference in front of all these people, and he just says, "I am Iron Man."
Iron Man. Yeah.
This movie has an "I am Iron Man" ending that just had me like, now I have to see the sequel. I know the sequel. I've never seen these movies, but I think the sequel is actually a prequel, right? It's the beginning. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we find out what happens after that global politics changing moment that we'll get to. But I was just like on the floor. I'm like, oh my God, this is more incendiary than all the explosives that went off in the previous 90 minutes.
Which there was a lot of explosives going off for 90 minutes. I did do a little bit of reading in this. I just didn't finish the chapter. I apologize. But the reading I did read, it was interesting that I guess there was another script floating around about the same time called Missing in Action as well.
Wait, it was called Missing in Action as well? That sounds
just Missing in Action, not Missing in Action. You smart ass. No. Apparently there was another script drifting around at the time like that. And they ended up getting wind of it, and Chuck Norris was looking to, he was a big name by this time, actually. And apparently he was having a little trouble either getting into this movie, getting it made or whatnot. So of course he shows up at Cannon Films, and Cannon, yeah, sure. And then they saw Friday the 13th, the final chapter, and they said, we got to get this director for Missing in Action. I don't know how you equate the director of Friday the 13th final chapter looking at that going, wow, we got to get him to direct Missing in Action, but they do.
Well, actually, watching Missing in Action, I had Joseph Zito in mind a lot, because I'm like, yeah, this kind of feels like the guy who made the final chapter.
Well, it does have his style. I mean, it is his style, the way it's handled. So you do see his signature. It's just interesting on how they put that connection together. It's like, what? He'd also direct Invasion USA as well, starring Mr. Chuck Norris. And I think he also did a later Delta Force movie. But yeah, he did he did Invasion USA after this with
Did
Mr.
you
Norris.
catch the other final chapter connection in this movie?
I don't think so. Which was the other one?
Is an actor who is credited in the opening credits, which is very odd because he is on screen for a minute and you barely see his face. It's Eric Anderson, who played Rob in the final chapter. He was the survivalist guy whose sister had been killed. And it's funny because they both have similar death scenes. In final chapter, he ends up in the basement with Jason Hackman at death going, he's killing me. He's killing me. And in this movie, it's Chuck Norris's fantasy sequence.
And he gets stabbed. Yeah.
Yeah. Repeatedly bayoneted by the guy, just waiting for him to go, he's killing me.
It's funny because you equate, we usually equate Cannon films with over the top action, which you do, but this one has just a little twinge of seriousness and levity, I think, to it that some of the other action films that you get from Cannon, may have been missing slightly. I mean, because you're right, it opens with this extended dream sequence of Chuck Norris and trying to rescue his buddies, and it's part flashback, you get the idea, and part nightmare So you're dealing with the issue of PTSD before it was ever really mentioned, because that's what he's dealing with is PTSD. And you're watching a sequence, and then you watch, and it's like, okay, Chuck Norris is the hero. And wait, what's he doing with the 2 grenades? Wait, he just jumps off of this tower onto these Vietnamese soldiers that are stabbing his buddies repeatedly, and it blows up, and you're like, what the? And then he wakes up in cold sweats and that, and I'm just like, wow, that's kind of, I was like, you don't expect kind of that from an action film,
Well, 2 things. I didn't go back and watch it yet. I probably will, but I was thinking about over dinner of all things. When I should have been paying more attention to my kid describing the video game he was playing, but I just couldn't latch on. I was thinking about how that was shot, because you see him like run and jump into the frame, and he falls down, and then almost immediately see the explosion. I don't know if that was a plate, but it looked like the explosion actually came up from off where he was below. Yeah. I'm like, how did they even pull that off? if they didn't do something like crazy in camera. But the other thing is, when I'm watching that scene, it's the end of this. In other hands, this would have been a parody. I was thinking of like the Rambo sequence from UHF. Right. He's just going through the jungle, blowing things up, and everything explodes spectacularly. And then you see him take this dramatic dive with the 2 grenades. Like, this is G.I. Joe propaganda nonsense. But then when he wakes up and he's completely freaked out, you realize this is the dark version of what's going on in his head, of him playing the hero soldier, but he couldn't save everybody. And we get even more detail on that later when we find out he's only been back in country for a year. Yeah. He was a prisoner for 7 years, and he somehow managed to escape. So this isn't like a guy, and we don't find this out until like a half hour into the show. So we're thinking, okay, this was Vietnam. He was probably there like 5-6 years ago, and he's still thinking about it. No, this is still fresh for him. The war is still going on. So this big, dumb action movie immediately takes on more dimensions. So it's a very complicated film. I don't like all of missing in action, but I like a lot of it. There's some parts I think are, as the kids say, problematic, but a lot of it's really interesting.
I think, and I get it completely. I know what you're talking about, the problematic stuff, because that was running through my head. But what they do with the Braddock character is very interesting, and he's a far more complex character than just your average action hero guy. And not only that, the scope of his character. This isn't just some soldier who came home. He's getting news press about him. He's on the news. He is a known face. I mean, he is celebrity, bad word, but for lack of a better term, but he is known. I mean, they're talking about him on the news show before he flips it to Spider-Man.
In which Spider-Man swings around a giant American flag.
That's right.
I swear, Michael Bay was like watching this stuff in high school going, yeah, that's what I'm going to do.
It is extraordinarily heavy on the American propaganda, as you imagine. Only 9 years out from the Vietnam War, they portray Braddock as this hero against an entire nation of, and it's part of the problematic thing is part of, at least they don't portray every single person as an American hating individual in Vietnam. It's mostly the government part and the soldiers who hate. The civilians have no problems. But it's this dictatorship that they have, led by James Wong. I think I got the name right. I hope I got the name right. God.
I think it's James Hong.
Hong, thank you. Yeah. James Hong. So, at least they play that angle, but you still get that feeling of America good, Vietnam bad in this.
Well, and that's that's the thing is, I got the rah-rah patriotism thing, but I also understand it. It is a propagandistic piece, but you also have to understand that we're still in the middle of the Cold War.
Right. Yeah.
And, it's very interesting when you look at the Vietnamese embassy, you have, because it was a communist kind of regime, you've got a picture of, I think it was Lenin, not John Lennon, hanging, like this giant banner hanging up. So you understand that Vietnam was caught up in this conflict. It was sort of the American ideal of, we're going to stamp out communism, and there are people that were just caught up in this, living under this kind of rule, whatever they thought about it. Were they patriots? Were they not, for their own cause? Who knows? So yeah, you're right. It's not, I don't know, there's an anti-Vietnamese movie. I think it's easy to think of it that way if you don't watch it. But, you just see them as people who are caught up in these weird systems of prostitution and drugs. And, even the so-called American heroic characters like Tuck, played by M. Emmett Walsh, at one point, I think it's supposed to be a joke. Maybe it's like that 1980s kind of humor that doesn't really work today. I don't even know if it did back then. But at one point, Braddock has to go on a mission, and he busts into a room, and Tuck's sitting there with two naked, possibly underage prostitutes. And he's like, "Hey, you want to join in?" I'm like, and then there's also other scenes. I don't know how much of this was filmed on location or whatever, but there are a lot of scenes in, Vietnamese bars where there's just like naked girls dancing around on tables
with the worst rendition of "If You Want My Body and You Think I'm Sexy." The singer that they got for it, and I don't know if it was meant to be a little satirical. It might have been in that aspect, because that, I was like, wait, is she sing? She is singing with it was meant to be a brothel, though. I mean, it was a brothel. They do have those. So, I mean, it's
right. It's American pop tunes. So they're trying to ingratiate themselves, I'm sure, with people who are traveling through with their big, fat, green American bucks. But there's another scene where Braddock is getting information from a guy at a bar. He's bribing and everything. And he walks away from the bar, and immediately, and this is where the Joe Zito angle comes in, you see these massive tits like flop into frame as this drunk guy like plops a whore up on the bar, and like then it cuts away. I'm like, what am I watching?
For like 2 seconds. It's like whoop. I'm like, oh, okay. But Braddock's a man's man. He is in this film because he doesn't at all have any type of, even when we get the liaison who comes along with him, the female character, she's not even really a love interest. She kind of starts to like him because he is so manly. I mean, you can tell that's kind of the angle they're playing with him, but he doesn't care because he's on a mission. He wants to find his buddies who are MIA, who no one believes are MIA. The Vietnamese Republic, the communist government, is trying to paint Braddock as just a common criminal, saying he killed men, women, and children. And you're looking at it going, okay, it's Braddock. We're not quite sure if that was actually him, but
it's a fascinating angle because he's going there to accuse them of having these prisoners of war, and they turn around very easily with the propaganda and this press conference, bringing all these poor people just to say, yeah, you're actually the war criminal. And then the people that they bring in, he actually recognizes some of them, and the one guy at the end of the line is like, I'm sorry. He's like, I get it. I know you have to be here and do this. No hard feelings. But it's for a that's almost an entirely different movie that we're watching.
Right.
And I think it's great. It's a layer of kind of subtext that gets, followed up on at the end in that spectacular ending that I mentioned earlier. There's so much going on in this movie that I just loved. And the love interest you mentioned, Lenore Kasdoff, as Anne Fitzgerald, is sort of the diplomatic liaison. What I loved is that, and this is something that we've kind of lost in the subsequent years, is the older, she's not old, but she's like in her mid to late 30s love interest.
She's not a young bubbly secretary, 20-some. She is a woman who has been in this position for a while. She's experienced. She is an older woman than what you might be used to, especially considering you've got the older gentleman. And if you're playing along with your typical action fantasy, for lack, again, it's that type of film. She does not fit that normal archetype that you're used to seeing. Which, I thought was interesting too. I mean, she is someone who is serious. She knows her job, and she doesn't just fawn over him. Even when he starts stripping in her place, she's just like, excuse me. She kind of looks back again and going, wow, your body hair is really well groomed. No, she doesn't say that, but she looks back occasionally, but she's more appalled and just has no idea, whereas it may have been played in a different movie, especially with a younger secretary or whatever. So, come up and hit on him. And then she's like, no, I got a job to do. We don't get that. She just kind of is like, what the hell? She's like, I literally asked you in here for a nightcap, not that.
But they seem to have a bit of interest, in each other, because I think it's the next day when she's going. They're parting ways essentially. You get the feeling there could be something there under different circumstances,
right?
But you'd get the feeling that you're talking to two adults, who are kind of on an equal level, dealing with each other maturely instead of kind of what you're describing.
Yeah, well, he did see her topless. I mean, we need to backtrack a little bit because Braddock's under watch by two of the worst inconspicuous tailors, and tailors not by cloth makers. I'm talking about people who are supposed to be tailing him. They're the worst. They're like looking like typical gangster type with the shades and everything, and trying to act nonchalant like they're not watching him. And he sneaks away by making it seem like he's doing the rendezvous with her in her apartment. He actually sneaks away, goes to the embassy, commits about 80,000 political crimes, gets the information he needs, kills a general, comes back, and all that. But the secondhand man, who is also the general who tortured Braddock, who just happens because the country, convenience of plot, it just so happens this guy who was the one general that tortured him is also the one that is there, in the thick of everything.
But well, Mark, Vietnam is it's a country of like 2 city blocks. It's not very big. So the fact that these two characters would be in the same political structure, in the same building, in fact, no coincidence at all.
Yeah, sure. Okay. You stay with that. Whatever makes you sleep better at night. Anyway, no.
I don't sleep. I wait.
You wait. Yes. But he's the right-hand man of James Hong's character. And he realizes it probably was Braddock, because who else? What a coincidence. There's an assault on this compound the same time that Braddock happens to be in town, but it's got to be him. So they go to the hotel. Braddock does this wonderful stealth sneaking back into the hotel scene, which is actually very well directed. But he gets into this apartment just as the soldiers are outside. And so, of course, he goes for the immediate distraction. He literally, in one fell swoop, pulls her top off, shoves her into the bed under the sheets. He dives under there with her and makes it look like they were, going at it the minute the soldiers break in the room. It's like that whole sequence from when he leaves the hotel to when he comes back. I really enjoyed how that was directed. Actually, I was trying not to think of all the things that were wrong about him breaking into a compound in a foreign land and doing what he was doing, but
that's where we get into the kind of the moral grays of this movie, because it's a noble mission. There are American soldiers who are being kept, and he's got to find out where they are. But then you just put the shoe on the other foot. It's like, well, let's take it into something more contemporary. If a member of Al Qaeda wanted to get into Gitmo And so he, started sneaking around bases, like killing guards or like roughing up people, or, killing a general in their bed to find out the information. How would we react to that? Is that heroism? It is for the part of, his people, but certainly not for ours.
Right. And it goes along with what you're saying before, with so much going on in this film, because we get wonderful, serious scenes where he's looking at each person of these villagers who are claiming that he killed people. And it's a wonderfully directed, serious scene. I mean, Norris actually puts some acting in. And then you get this ridiculous action scene of him attacking the compound like the very night. And I'm just like, wow, and then it flips back to another kind of, serious scene where, and then it's back and forth. It's like they really juggle a lot. And this is a Vietnam film. And yes, Vietnam films were popular in the 80s, but this is actually, if I'm looking at dates, and I was looking at them a bit, this was actually one of the first films to actually, I mean, outside of the Rambo, like really address Nam, have the hero be a Vietnam War vet and addressing this, because you're talking 84. The other ones like Hamburger Hill, Full Metal Jacket, Platoon,
those were later. Yeah,
those are all later. But it's wild that Cannon has one of the early Vietnam films.
Yeah, and I think what's cool is that the movies from the latter part of the mid 80s, like the ones that you were talking about, they take on Vietnam from a completely different angle. As casualties of war. It's almost like they are the answer to the missing in action movies, which based only on the first one. I haven't seen the other, so I don't know what the tone is. This movie treats the war seriously, treats Vietnam vets seriously, but there is also that element of super heroism, lone man going alone with the American flag waving behind him, killing a bunch of nameless Vietnamese soldiers. There's a glamour to it in a sense. So I think Oliver Stone and other directors were like, let's tell a more realistic story. These were horrifying, traumatic events. There was nothing cool about them. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of a mixed bag with missing in action.
It is. You're not quite sure where you're going, because it's like, oh, we're dealing with this kind of seriously, and I'm trying to picture people, like you said, 9 years out, it's still fresh in people's mind, and seeing this, it's like
it'd be like in 2009 or 2010 making a buddy cop action movie about being in Tower 2 on September 11th.
Yeah. Yes.
We got to get these people out of here, Tuck. Whoa, just give me a second, boss. That kind of stuff.
Which I loved Emmett. I did love him in this. I mean, his Hawaiian shirt wearing self. I love that shirt that he had.
Well, I was reminded of something else. I want to hold this up. If you guys have not picked up your copy, track down Ebert's Bigger Little Movie Glossary. This is it's a funny book, but it's a greatly expanded, much improved compendium of movie cliches, stereotypes, obligatory scenes, hackneyed formulas, shop-worn conventions, and outdated archetypes. And there's one in here that I love referring to. I think one of these gentlemen is still with us. The Stanton Walsh Rule. Have you heard of this?
I might have, but please go tell us the Stanton Walsh Rule.
No movie featuring either Harry Dean Stanton or M. Emmett Walsh, who plays Tuck in this film, in a supporting role can be altogether bad. Exceptions are Chattahoochee starring Walsh and Wild at Heart starring Stanton. So yes, when M. Emmett Walsh shows up in a movie, or Harry Dean Stanton is automatically worth at least an extra star than what you would have given it.
And I can fully agree with that. I actually do, because as this film moves on, in all honesty, when Jack Tucker shows up, Emmett Walsh's character, Emmett Walsh's character, it's actually at the perfect time you need it to in this film, because it just starts to feel like, okay, you got the one-man army against, Vietnam. Are we going into kind of more Rambo territory? But then he gets a buddy sidekick, who can hold his own. Don't get me wrong, though. He is not like a complete bumbling fool. This his character is a veteran soldier as well. He served with Braddock. You know, they get a moment in here where he talks about, yeah, I do owe you for a lot, and it's like handled seriously. It's like, whoa, you know. And then he's talking about his boat and how it's enhanced, and then we get this wild action sequence with the horrible gangsters that show up, the hired guns that try to go after Braddock in this wonderful car chase on a dock, which is weird because just before that scene, he's in a hotel room because one of our gangsters who have been tailoring Braddock hides in his room.
In the wardrobe.
In the wardrobe, which is hilarious because once Braddock gets into his apartment, because we see evil guy, and I just call him Evil Guy 1 because that's what he looks like. I mean, from his suit to the glasses to the slick back hair, he's Evil Guy 1. He's Minion 1. Okay, you see him sneak into Chuck Norris's room that he's rented. And when Chuck gets in there, excuse me, Braddock, whatever, he gets in the room, you're like, there's not many places for this guy to hide. He's in the wardrobe. He's in there. And so you're just waiting for it. You know, once again, Chuck removes his shirt. Again.
Thank you, Joseph Zito. Yeah.
Thank you. And yeah, he's fighting. And it's kind of, you know, the stylized, okay, action sequence like we're used to seeing. And he throws the guy out the window. And most action films, you're like, oh, okay, it's done. The guy's knocked out. Chuck looks down. He looks across the street. There's our general guy. And then you cut to next scene. But we don't get that. General guy's got his own minion with a freaking rocket launcher. And he launches a rocket into the place where where Braddock is, who just narrowly escapes. And even then you're like, okay, action trope, he gets up. He gets to the street and you find that debris and stuff from the explosion has injured kids, has injured people. It suddenly takes this dark, serious moment. I mean, we've had like 3 minutes of crazy cannon action, and all of a sudden he gets down to the street. You're just like, oh, whoa. I mean, there's parents carrying a kid who's unconscious. There's a guy covering his eyes because he's bleeding. I'm just like, well, that got dark real quick again. I'm like,
well, and that's why I really wish I'd been around an adult in the 80s, because, you know, when this movie came out, I was like 7 years old or something. But my recollection of these films, or my knowledge of them, which is very limited because I hadn't really seen them until now, is that these are kind of like the kick-ass, like, oh yeah, you got to go see Missing in Action. I can't imagine sitting down and watching this. It's not like Commando. No. Or one of those things where you really are just watching some guy drop one-liners and creatively murder people, you know, for the sake of justice. This movie really is about something, and it's straddles that line of like exploitation and commentary. Because you're absolutely right. When he sees those families in the street and they're bleeding and they're crying out, you know, we don't get any actual like flashbacks, but you can just see that he's like, oh, yeah, I've been through that. I've seen this movie before, kind of a thing. And he's sort of re-traumatized again, but he still has to go on this mission. But he's like, yeah, it's not like a town of 5 people and they're all bad guys. They're towns of, you know, hundreds or thousands of people. Many of them are just trying to survive under a system that I'm trying to help bring down.
Yeah, exactly. So again, it's one of those things where it's kind of out of like, oh, this is supposed to be just a fun action film, I thought, but now you got some seriously heavy shit in here. Well, this unexpected again, you know. And I mean that in a great way. That's why I enjoy this film. It breaks those tropes in that it's got that mixture of the exploitation, zany action sequences, but at the same time, it then suddenly brings some weight to things that you aren't expecting. So you're just kind of like, oh, whoa, okay. You know, and they break another trope in here because we get our evil general guy. Braddock does his thing on the docks. He takes out the bad guys in this wonderful action sequence with a truck, which don't ask why the henchmen just don't shoot the truck when they're next to it. why they feel the need to jump into the back of the truck and then specifically shoot Braddock rather than just shoot the truck.
I don't know.
I don't know. Again, that's where it's back to crazy action film, doing those wonderful head scratching action scenes. But we get the main general who's just like, he doesn't say it, but you get the idea. He's like, well, if you want something done right, you're going to do it yourself. So General, the guy who was the torturer for Braddock for so many years, the guy who was, been part of this political system now, he hops in a boat. Next scene, we get old Braddock driving the boat because we figure, Tucker and them are sleeping. And he's looking at the map. He looks a little confused, like he's a little lost. But he's looking, and all of a sudden the general shows up. And now you would think this, and let me know, Ian, does this surprise you? You would think a confrontation like this would be saved to the end. Like, because this is the big bad guy who tortured him. And this is Braddock getting it, confronting this guy again years later. And, it's going to be on long extended action sequence. And that's how the movie ends. But he offs this guy in a few minutes, in all honesty.
He does.
Unceremoniously, actually.
No, I think there was some. I think there was quite.
Well, there's a little. Okay, there was a little bit, yeah.
Because it's not, he does. It's an axe fight, but he isn't just like lop off his head. And I hadn't seen this before. I don't know if it's been done since, but the axe head comes off of the handle, and then it ends up a two-man struggle. We've seen, I think we even see in this movie 1 or 2 times, the whole struggle with the knife, kind of a thing between two people. This is an axe head, and the moment between the two of them, as the balance of power with this axe head between their two chests switches, and it's intimate and kind of terrifying, and you really feel the pain of this guy because it's a brutal death. I mean, this is the guy who made Friday the 13th, the final chapter. I know Savini wasn't doing the effects, but they seem to try and go for that, realism that like, oh, this is not comfortable. This is not cool. It's not a cool fight scene.
No, it's not. It
a
hurts
brutal, to watch.
It's a brutal fight scene, and it's a brutal end to that fight. But it's fitting because of what that guy had done to Braddock. You completely understand, because Braddock's, all of his rage gets pushed into that fist that slams the axe head into the guy's chest. And you hear a little crunch, and the guy, it's like, wow. And it's, again, another one of those moments where you're just like, holy crap. And then we're back to Walsh showing up in his, the big gun and getting a boat. And
well, that gets back to, we keep ping-ponging back and forth with these moral gray areas, because he's the evil commander of this military who tortured, Braddock and all of his friends, and how many he knows other people. But just imagine a Red Dawn situation where you've got an invading army coming into America and killing everybody. A movie that has Harry Dean Stanton in it. Damn it.
Yes, it does.
But they overrun the country, and you have to have these resistance fighters pop up, and so you have Vietnam in America, which I think was kind of the point of that movie, except for the set for the Cold War contemporary times. Who's to say that commander guy wasn't Patrick Swayze, who went nuts and started torturing the invaders because they wiped out his entire village or family or whatever. And then to see Patrick Swayze getting killed in the end in a giant knife or axe head battle, and you just be like really sad, like, no, he was my neighbor. He was I liked that guy.
Yeah.
So it's a movie that you can just watch it for Chuck Norris popping out of the water and machine gunning a bunch of faceless goons, or you can also take some more away from it and be a bit more reflective, which is something I was not expecting with this thing.
Yeah, and you don't, because of the way it's promoted, the way people talk about this. I mean, they obviously talk about the final. Everybody mentions about the final scene. I mean, first off, he gets a bulletproof boat, which
that was awesome.
Bulletproof boat is amazing. When he goes to buy this boat, it's like, oh, well, one bullet and it's done. And the black arms dealer goes, oh yeah, and they shoot this AK-4 all over this boat, and it doesn't even flatten it. And then they allow Braddock into the boat, who then nonchalantly arms the gun and points it at him and saying, I will not pay $20,000 for this. I will pay $5,000 for it. So it's a great scene. But they've got this boat that they use to go into Vietnam, and they got a little mini boat that they keep just in case something happens to the big boat, which actually is a pretty smart plan. Well, and they take. Go ahead.
I was going to say another detail that kind of playing with convention here is they say, yeah, this thing will stop machine guns. It can take all kind of fire unless you shoot a grenade at it, which usually is foreshadowing of in the middle of the battle, they're going to get hit with the grenade and everything's going to go to hell. I don't think they did that. That boat was intact right at the end.
Well, until they used the rocket launcher.
Right. Okay. So it wasn't a grenade. It wasn't a grenade. But then that was at the very.
But that was that was like near the very end. Those were the last 3 guys out of the caravan that survived that they hadn't shot. So those 3 guys, they're the ones that were laughing. Oh, ha ha! Because then we get the epic slow-mo, like slow-mo. Like, folks, you've got a slow-mo and then there's the extra slow-mo feature on your phone. It's like using the extra slow-mo feature on your phone as Braddock comes out of the water, hand-holding the the machine gun that was mounted on the boat, and he's got the bullets, and he just slowly gets it.
Zack Snyder was like, come on, just pick it up, Jesus.
It was a slow-mo that Zack Snyder was even like, okay, that's a little long even for me. Okay, I know it's Chuck Norris, but he's got his shirt on. If you're gonna go that slow, at least have his shirt off. But I mean, don't get me wrong, it's wonderfully shot. It's like this, just they put everything in the kitchen sink in this film, and you could tell they were really feeling it, and they do have a hit. I mean, Missing in Action did well in the box office, and you could tell here because as they were filming it, I was reading a little bit. They decided while shooting this to do Missing in Action 2, so they had a scriptwriter come out to where they were shooting Missing in Action 1 to write the script for Missing in Action 2, and they shot them pretty much back to back.
Oh wow.
Because Canon, Golan, Globus, they know how to stretch a buck.
I mean, it makes sense because if you're already out there and you've got all the vehicles and you've got your stars, I mean, I don't know. Have you seen Missing in Action 2?
It's been a long time. I have seen it. It's just been a long time, but it's also a mixture, if I remember correctly.
So is Emmett Walsh in that? We find out like their relationship or something, or is it?
I don't remember if he's in the Tucker character might be in it. I don't know if it's actually him because it's supposed to be younger, which it's Chuck Norris. So all they do is like dye his beard, and now he's like 20 years younger.
Wow.
Which I love. I don't get me wrong. I just it's in this film. It's just crazy.
They should have gotten like a teenager to play Chuck Norris, and then have Chuck Norris play Tuck, a young Tuck.
Oh well, there you go.
Confuse the hell out of everybody.
Yeah, no, there is no Tuck. There is no Tuck in Missing in Action 2. So unfortunately, there is no Tuck. But
so I want to talk about Tuck's demise. Something that I had to go back and rewind because there are some really terrible editing moments in this movie.
The ending really, as it goes on, especially when the helicopter, you're right. Go ahead. Yeah. The ending, especially the editing, suddenly like they ran out of money or something.
Well, so there's a shootout that there's a caravan carrying prisoners of war on a road. Right. Chuck Norris, Emmett Walsh, and the gunmen pull up alongside this in their gunboat, and they start shooting from the water.
And he hits all the guys that he points at.
Yes, he hits everybody except the POWs in the truck. Some skilled marksmanship, to be sure. But so they rescue the soldiers, and it's this beautiful moment where they open up the back of the truck, and there's the one guy who's got the machine gun because he's expecting more, Vietnamese soldiers to come around the corner, but he just can't let the gun go, and you can see he's completely like shell shocked and fucked up. It's just, you really feel what they've gone through, especially when he's like, "You're going home." It's like, we're going home. Great stuff. But they get to the water, and there's a gunboat, which reminded me, the first editing problem I have is not sequentially the first editing issue, but I want to get to it because it's one I brought up. When Emmett Walsh dies, he's up on the gun-mounted machine gun, or the boat-mounted machine gun, shooting, and then the boat from a distance. When I rewound, I saw that the guy used rocket-propelled grenade, but you just see something going on that boat, and then it cuts to Emmett Walsh, and then I think it cuts back and back again. When we see that the grenade is hit, it's already halfway done exploding. Like, there's always like already like little fires and stuff. You don't get any kind of reaction shot from Emmett Walsh, like an oh fuck moment, or even just time for us to absorb like what happened. I wasn't even sure if that was Tuck's boat, because there's so much going on in this scene. But the other problem was this gunship that's coming at them. It's forever. It's moving really quickly, but they keep cutting back and forth. I'm like, it's still the same distance away. It reminded me of that Austin Powers bit with the steamroller. I think it was Michael McDonald was like, "No," as it's like a centimeter away from him. Oh, just so bad.
Yeah, the whole sequence at the end, I'm not sure. It's like it felt a little rushed, and maybe they were running tight on budget or whatnot, because first off, they still have the Vietnamese army chasing them after they rescue the guys from the caravan. There's a whole reinforcements coming, and they're different troops in different uniforms. So, they're like the next level guys. If they were a video game, it'd be the next level. It's a whole new board. Anyway, so they take the POWs, and these soldiers are the worst shots in the world because they don't have a bulletproof boat anymore. They have a little raft that they load the POWs on, and they're paddling out towards Emmett's to Tucker's boat. And these guys are shooting at them, the Vietnamese, from the shore, and they're missing a lot for the distance that they're supposed to be at. I'm like, really, it's that editing thing that you were talking about, just like the boat that took forever to get to.
Well, with what you're talking about, I can explain. It's not an editing mistake. It's just that Braddock was catching all those bullets in his teeth. We just didn't see him spitting them out. That's all it was.
True. That's true. I mean, you did get cover fire from Tucker's buddy on the boat who was shooting at the shore. But even still, if you look at the way they have the camera angle, that little raft is not that far from shore when they're paddling out. I'm trying not to think about it. I'm trying to be in the moment, but I just like, you guys aren't that far, and they're that bad a shot. And then the other boat too was like, how far away is that? But why are you even shooting at them? Because that can't be the distance that you have for that gun.
No, the folks in the raft, they would have been better just like jumping out and swimming the rest of the way.
Well, and you get that moment where Braddock they're out there, and Tucker's buddy's shooting at the boat that's far away. And Braddock's like, yeah, no, we're going to head back. He's like, he sees where this is going. He knows that guy is not going to survive this. The boat is more heavily armored. And they start paddling back. And that's when Tucker decides to go to his boat and go down with his ship, shooting at the far distance Vietnamese armored boat. And so just as they show up, there's the rented helicopter, which Braddock rented. And again, they're able to get up the rope and everything without getting shot because they have plot armor. And then as they fly away, then Braddock blows up the boat because it finally makes it to Tucker's fiery boat carcass. And then, then we get the helicopter landing in front of the embassy. Again, no one takes shots at this helicopter coming into a civilian area. They land.
I think it was just more of the kind of the visual poetry of like the famous images from Vietnam of like the helicopter leaving the embassy, and now it's kind of landing.
Yeah.
So I'll give it points for that, because I was not expecting that. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. But yeah, I don't think it would have gotten anywhere near that.
It's just, and you're trying not to think too hard, but when you get those other serious moments in here that are great moments in this film, and then you get to this end and it just seems like it's little cobbled more together, almost like they weren't quite sure where to go with it at some point.
Unless they were getting radio signals from the people in the jungle, like, look, there's a guy in a helicopter. He's coming. He's headed towards the embassy. Just leave him alone. Just don't fuck with Chuck.
Don't fuck with Chuck. That's right. Well, it could be too because there was press there, so they may not have wanted to fire on the helicopter because there was press. Because that did dawn on me when they were landing. I'm like, why aren't the Vietnamese soldiers, the strange helicopter showing up? Or like, you're not at least pulling a gun on them. But then I saw that there were the media, the press.
Yeah,
and same reason why when they see Braddock with the soldiers, they just try to block him. They don't actually try to shoot him or arrest him or anything. They just try to block, and he just pushes his way through. And then they do this interspersed cut where they got him trying to push his way through the guards, and then you've got the head of the Vietnamese government going, "We could certify that there are no MIA soldiers left in Vietnam." And just as you hit that cue, he busts through the door with the soldiers. Freeze frame credits.
The 1984 freeze frame.
Yeah, the 1984 freeze frame.
Yeah, of course. Karate Kid, Friday the 13th, the final chapter,
and
Missing in Action.
If it wasn't there, I would have been disappointed, in all honesty, if it wasn't there.
But that's the Iron Man moment where, like, you've got the attention of the world and you pull this, like, hey, what do you think of this? It's like, oh my God.
Which, it makes sense then why the film that we're going to cover next week, Missing in Action 2, the beginning, why they went that route with it, because where do you go from here? With your movie, you can't really get a lot of action-packed sequences of Braddock sitting on a witness stand. It just of course it'd be another court drama, in which case, there you go. We haven't had one for a while, so
I know we gotta. Are there any canon court dramas? What would that even be like?
So I mean, this film, it's just interesting because before this, you had Rambo, which handled the Vietnam a lot more serious. I mean, a lot of people look at Rambo and think it's that effect of what I call the Army of Darkness effect. People say they love Evil Dead, Bruce Campbell and Ash. I'm like, well, which Ash? Do you like him in Evil Dead or do you like him from Army of Darkness? Well, I saw him in Army of Darkness. That's a different Ash than in the first Evil Dead. Rambo. Oh, I love Rambo. You do know the first one, he kind of was, PTSD extreme, and he kind of took out a lot of things on innocent people and such, right? And Rambo, no, I mean Rambo 3, where he shoots a helicopter with an explosive tipped arrow. People think of, I think, that character versus what you get. And here with, Missing in Action, you actually have a layered character with Braddock. And by, we'll find out what happens by 3. But I mean, the title alone is going to give you away a little bit of that type of film. But
well, it's interesting because I just looked this up because I was thinking the timeline didn't quite work out. Missing in Action. Okay, there was First Blood.
Yes.
And then there was Missing in Action. Rambo First Blood Part 2 came out in 1985, the year after this. So
sure,
as far as the public consciousness goes, this was, and some out there can correct me, but as we were talking about, this feels like the first big Vietnam sort of action movie, because First Blood was all on American soil. It was about a guy dealing with PTSD and the war came back to him kind of a thing. In this, it's all in Vietnam. It's a modern Vietnam story. But then you've got Rambo First Blood Part 2, which is a completely different film that, now that we're talking about this movie, feels like a reaction to, Stallone was like, well, I got a character who was a Vietnam guy too, and he could kick ass. Let's put him back in country, see what happens. Yeah.
It's just interesting, but I guess my point was just that people picture these iconic action characters in that in like the later films to where they are more of the tropish, almost superhero type elevated character. Whereas their first film, if you look at it, they're like, yeah, that wasn't exactly how they started out.
And that's I'm agreeing with you totally. It's interesting to see how this thing evolved, with First Blood and even Missing in Action, taking things kind of seriously. The later sequels for Rambo, anyway, getting more ridiculous, but then you've got that balancing out of like the 86 through 88 serious Vietnam dramas that still had action, but they also had consequence. But I always wonder if a lot of the big dumb 80s action movies that are separate from Vietnam, like Commando, like everything else Schwarzenegger and Stallone did, were kind of planted, those seeds were planted in Missing in Action as well.
To
write that book.
Yeah, there you go. There, let's draw that diagram to that conclusion. This is a film I think people remember certain parts, like we mentioned, the exploding base when he gets to the base where the MIAs are supposed to be, and he's got all the C4 in the world in the pack of infinite holding, which if you play D&D, it's a pack that holds just however much you want. He's got this small backpack, but he's got like 8 blocks of C4 in it, ammo, primer core. I mean, he's got all kinds of shit in this one small backpack. It's amazing,
and it all works. Like there wasn't one of those little clay packs with the timers on it that got wet or disturbed or just malfunctioned.
No, he had it timed perfectly that all these things blow up, and he snuck around the camp, and he was able to get the better of them. I mean, to the point of he's standing out in the middle of the field just shooting at guys who have the higher ground, and he's just taking them out left and right. And people, I think of that scene, but don't think of the stuff leading up to it with his character, like we've mentioned earlier tonight with some of the serious moments, and so it's just interesting how perception later on for these films, especially for those who may have seen them much, much later after they come out, the perception of these characters has changed, over the years of what people think of them as, what they think of, and what the character actually started out at. I just love always seeing that kind of progression and seeing how things, I mean, it's the same reason, I mean, the 80s was famous for it. I mean, look at all your horror icons. When you got people cheering for Freddy, they're cheering for Jason, they're watching the movie for Pinhead and not the victims, it's like, wait, these are the bad guys. Or in this one, he wasn't just the one-liner quip guy. He was a guy with PTSD in the woods of a New England town that he was laying siege to. He wasn't the guy pouring gunpowder into his open wound and lighting it. And yeah, that was later, but that's not how he started. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just interesting how some of these characters evolved, and our perception of them. And I think Missing in Action is one of those things too, where this is one of those films where it's kind of lumped with those. And final thought that I had with that last scene where I mentioned the exploding base, that's also directed well by Zito, because Braddock has blown up most of the bad guys. Like, he snuck around enough with the C4, just blew them all up. There's nobody. So he goes to rescue them, and he opens up the cages. And the way they edit and directed this sequence, it's short, but he opens it. There's no American soldiers, but you think everything's empty. But it actually isn't. He finds one guy who is actually a prisoner. He's not a U.S. POW, but he's still a POW. Nonetheless, he rescues him. And then suddenly we see out of the 4 other cages that he opened, other people appearing. And you're like, holy crap. Because we don't see Braddock react when he opens the door. He's just like, oh, that's not an American in there, that's empty. And the way he reacts, it's not empty, it's full of these guys who want their revenge. And they talk about getting up their own weapons and getting their freedom.
Well, and it's also a great reminder that that war wasn't just about Americans versus Vietnam. Right. There were other conflicts going on. We went and kicked over this giant hornet's nest.
Right.
And I give credit to the writers and the director and Chuck Norris for bringing that bit of realism and reflection into that movie. I don't know if the average moviegoer who is going to see this thought anything about that, but at least there was a seed planted in their head that they might think about something later.
I would like to think so, but even if they didn't, we're here now, and you look at this, and there's a reason why this film is still talked about today, not only by us, by a lot of people. I think my final thought with it is, don't go into it thinking it's just your average Chuck Norris guns a-blazing action film, because there are moments in here, a lot of them peppered throughout, where it takes a serious turn and gives you weight and things to think about that you aren't expecting from this film from Cannon, starring the almighty Chuck Norris that some people see him as, you know what I mean, the icon of action men. You're like, oh, this actually has some layers to it. I'm not sure how this isn't just a blow 'em up movie. I mean, there's plenty of that, don't get me wrong, but I mean, what's your final thought with Missing in Action?
Well, I'm right there with you. I think even just down to the title, I always had thought of this as, missing in action. I always knew that there was the big missing in action kind of movement, and right. That the POW MIA, iconography was big back in the 80s. I remember that, growing up, but I always just thought it was sort of an exploitive title. Like, we've got these MIAs, we're going to make an action movie, missing in action. Action's in the title. Isn't that great? But it doesn't feel like it was an ironic title. It felt like Missing in Action. This is a movie about a guy who's trying to solve a very serious problem. He just happens to be doing it in the most spectacular pro rah-rah USA fashion possible.
He is. And that's kind of the, there's some of the problematic vision of 2021 now goggles. You look back at it going,
well, but that's the thing, is I don't even have a problem with, with patriotism or any of that. I think that it was very earnest. I referred to the movie earlier as propaganda, and it was.
Oh yeah.
But considering what we, as misguided as that effort might have been at the time, because we got mired down in Afghanistan with the Soviets, and it was a very turbulent time, but we collectively thought we were trying to stop, the successors to the Nazis with communism.
Right.
It's not like a lot of the conflicts that we've been embroiled in the last 20 years, certainly. So it's harder to look back and say, yeah, it was kind of, people were all united, at least in spirit, against this, common enemy that we didn't understand. Now everything's fractured, and we don't really have a high opinion of ourselves as a country. So as cheesy as it is kind of refreshing to think, yeah, people actually stood for something a long time ago and stood together.
Yeah. It when the Cold War gave you and even the Vietnam War, you gave people a specific enemy or a body of a collection of an entity to rally against or whatnot, or whatnot, versus individuals, which that's always one of those things that happens and that we've seen over the years, to where you're just like, how do we handle this? How do we kind of, because it's not just a group of people. Well, it's some people, but they're mixed in. They could be any one of these other individuals, and you're just like, how do you do a film like Missing in Action, or like you mentioned, Red Dawn, which is one of the epitome of Cold War fantasy films. I mean, in every way possible. You don't quite get those movies anymore, and I'm not saying we should. I'm just saying that it was a different time, and it is interesting to think that the film like this, because this was, I think, Missing in Action was probably, I believe it was Cannon's most successful film, or one of their top most successful films that they did. Namely because they had Chuck Norris, who got $1 million a picture.
Wow.
For well, I mean, because he was a big name at this point, so, but he was looking to do something more. But yeah,
I did like the Canon logo at the beginning. It had like the sparkles and the sheen. And it was like, oh, getting all fancy.
Well, it was 84 by this time, so Canon was getting into full swing. 10 years later, they fold, but for right now, if you look at Missing in Action, in just 4 short years, they've come a long way since The Apple. You know. I'm just, you know what I'm saying though, as far as the type, you know, they'll slide on the Apple. I love the Apple. I got the Blu-ray coming.
I got you. I'm just picturing Chuck Norris in the Apple, singing and dancing.
I don't know if Chuck Norris ever sang and danced. I would pay money to see that. That's a month. I'd be first in line to watch that, preferably without a shirt on. Him, not me. You don't want to see me without a shirt. Then well, I don't want to see me without a shirt. So,
what are we even talking about?
I don't know anymore. So we're going to close it up for the night. No, we are not firing the cannon tonight because we've got 2 more Canon films.
Okay.
I know. We've got 2 more Canon films that we're going to be doing this month. So we will fire it at Braddock. Okay. At the end of Braddock, we will fire the cannon for what next month's Canon film will be out of our last collection of films. Interesting a reason too, folks who have HBO Max, who enjoyed the wonderful classic film Godzilla versus King Kong, the classic. I'm putting it there now. See, Ian, look at it. He got an eye twitch, I think, from when I said that. Anyway,
I'm holding in the puke.
You're holding in the puke. I know. But HBO Max actually has Missing in Action and Missing in Action 2 because Canon did have an agreement with Warner Brothers for distribution. So that's why those 2 films are on there, but not Braddock.
Well, and I got to tell you something. I'm kind of pissed because I don't have HBO Max, and you can't get these movies anywhere, like to rent them. I had to buy. Now, when I say had to, I now having seen Mission Action 1, it's a good purchase. But I bought this Blu-ray. Own the moments of Delta Force Missing in Action 1 and Part 2.
Well, that's a hell of a collection, though. I mean, Delta Force Missing in Action 1, you got at least 2 films you know for sure you enjoy on there, Ian.
Yes.
So, you know, I'll be interested to see next week, yes, folks, when we talk about Missing in Action 2. We are doing all 3 films. And spoiler, because we are the spoiler room, we will be doing Chuck Norris versus a Demon. Hellbound will be our last film for the month of Don't Fuck with Chuck. So hope you've enjoyed this episode. Now, as always, it is a license to shill handed to my good man here, Ian. So please, sir, the floor is yours.
I'm Ian Simmons. You can find me at Kicking the Seat at kickseat.com. I also have the Kicking the Seat YouTube channel. So I put up movie reviews and interviews and critics roundtables and live streams and all that good stuff a few times a week. So pop on over. If you like what you see, please subscribe and like and tell your friends, and join Mark and I on Friday night, and pretty much every Friday night. Each week I do two live streams. One is this on Mark's channel, and then I've got one where Mark joins me and Earth's Mightiest Critics as one of Earth's Mightiest Critics, talking about the Disney Plus Marvel TV shows. So right now we're in the middle, the literal middle. Yeah, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So it's 8:30 p.m. Central. Come hang out, drop into the chat and watch a bunch of comics fans, some Marvel, some DC, talk about really cool shows.
Or just comics fans in general. I don't care the property. I'm more like the Gleek of the group. So there you have it, folks. And yes, July 9th will be our AMA for the YouTube channel, since I've been on here for 15 years for some reason.
This is the culmination.
It is this culmination. I thank every single person who has tuned into our channel and still tunes in. It does mean a whole lot to me. It means a lot that everyone wants to come on the show. Thank you, Ian, so much as always. And now we'll just say a good night, everyone.
Good night.